It is Wednesday. Welcome to Sales Chatter, logistics podcast where we aim to help 10,000 reps hit a million GP. I'm your co-host Ryan Mohamed, aka Logistics Monk. With me is Dano, the eyes of the blue ocean this morning. What's going on,
buddy? Good, buddy. Good. I got my G-tube out yesterday, brother. After 10 months of having this bloody thing rub on my ribs every time I move, I finally got it out. So I'm officially, as I said to my wife, I'm untethered like the Mustang. I'm good to go. Untethered, baby. Untethered, because the Mustang Mach-E has like regular mode and untethered, as if like the Mustang doesn't have a saddle on and it can just rip and ride. So yeah. I also got told to stop talking so much.
Yeah, it's all good. Let's rip and ride into our episode today.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
Ryan, you'll get a kick out of this. So I'm at my doctor's appointment yesterday, and he walks in the office, and I'm like, he's like, whoa. He goes, your throat hurt? I said, yeah. He goes, you talk too much.
Yeah.
Like, somebody else has told me that too.
Some buddies, we'll add a list, but it is data day. So first and foremost, Dan, glad to hear that you're on the mend. It's unstoppable from here going forward. So we're happy to kind of see that. So, let's introduce our amazing guests today who are joining us to talk everything data. You got to use data to tell your story. We have first and foremost the principal analysis at DAT Freight and Analytics, as well as the co-host of DAT IQ Live every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We've got the mad scientist himself, Dean Croke, joining us. What's going on, Dean?
Right up here.
I'm still laughing about the look on Ryan's face when Dad's talking and Ryan's thinking, where the heck is this going? And Dad's that one's funny.
As long as, like I said, boys, as long as we don't get canceled, we're that's the
what a job you've got as co-host of this revel. Good.
Oh, I love this so much. We want to bring in my amazing co-host who filled in yesterday amazingly and had his own show yesterday as well, which is awesome. We have the president and CEO of RGTX Logistics Solutions, the bodacious cowboy, Jeff Dickinson, joining us all the way from New Jersey. What is going on, cowboy?
Good morning, man. That is awesome news, and happy for you that you don't have a ripcord anymore. So that's awesome.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, and I know it might sound weird to you guys, but it was so awesome taking a shower without having this like foot-long thing hanging out of you, because it kind of, anyways, it was like, oh my gosh, and awesome. Like my shirts don't stick out like this anymore, and it was like, oh, but the feeling when they pulled it out yesterday, it was like, oh, because I don't know, for any of you that have ever had one, it goes up under your rib cage and into your stomach. So it's like a direct hole right into your stomach. And the human body is so amazing. Within like an hour, the stomach's closed. Within 2 hours, the second layer is closed. And within 3 days, the full thing's closed. I can go into pools and hot tubs again. 3 days. It's been there for 10 months. 3 days and I can jump into a hot tub. But when they pulled it out, so it's like this, it's about a tube this big that goes up and under your ribs and into your stomach. And then at the end of the tube, there's this balloon. And the balloon is what holds it in your stomach. So they deflate the balloon and they just go, and I'm like, what, really? And the feeling of not having this, because it kind of feels like a 5-pound weight right on the bottom of your rib cage, because so like as I started to gain weight, it started to pull up, and it was just rubbing and rubbing and rubbing, and I couldn't even explain the feeling, but it was a constant uncomfortableness right on your rib cage, and it was like an instant like, oh yeah, now we're talking, man. So yeah, that has nothing to do with data.
I still can't.
I was just gonna say, if anybody's watching and they just tuned in right now, this is not medical chatter, by the way.
It's not General Hospital.
Yeah, this is sales chatter. But first and foremost, no, truthfully speaking, really happy that I know it's a big accomplishment for you, and definitely it's pushing you forward, so we can definitely crush it there. Dean, I caught your episode yesterday. It was an amazing conversation with you're having, especially in terms of capacity. Let's start off with what's going on. We're talking like month end. Today's actually legit the last day of the month. We're ending not ending the quarter, but we're ending almost the year. I mean, half of the year, right? So let's those New Year's resolutions. If people are sticking to them, what's going on? And I'd love to get Jeff's point as well. What he's kind of seeing, reflection piece. I'd love this to be a reflection piece as we're kind of going into a new 6 months for the rest of the year.
Yeah, it's I mean, this is a short work week, right? So some of our numbers are going to be thrown off because I suspect there was a bit more volume in the market last week because our shippers wanted to get ahead of this holiday week. There were some carriers returned to the market. I suspect not as many carriers came back after road check week as you would normally think. It wasn't like a straight bounce back to the typical volume of carriers looking for loads on our load board. And it's almost like it was a continuation of last year's trend where a 1 week break turned into a 2 week vacation. So carriers had more time off last year because they could afford to. It almost looked like that again this year, but there's no question road check week caused a capacity crunch. At the same time, spot rates surged. That was 2 weeks ago. Last week, they held their own ground, although reefer rates are losing ground this week, back under $2 a mile for the first time. So the good news for carriers is, and maybe not shippers, but the good news is for carriers that rates are holding their own across the board. Dry van had stayed flat this week, but I think the warning signs are kind of there around produce. We're just not seeing the lift that we would normally typically see around produce season. It's still early days though. Like I'm not portraying a doom and gloom scenario. Your Florida season typically ends this week every year for the last 10 years. Peaks on 5:30, and then volumes just fall right away. Half of the volumes coming out of Florida are watermelons. Watermelon season, we're kind of done and dusted at the end of May. Southeast is still getting going. Southeast produce volumes won't peak until July 4. And as I said in my note a little bit earlier, we're seeing a shift, and there's a shift in both dry van and reefer. And again, it's a continuation of the same old story. There's still no labour agreement on the West Coast. And we're still seeing, significant volumes move to the Gulf Coast to the point where, I don't know if you've caught the news today, but the UP and BNSF both announced rail services out of Houston to Fort Worth, Denver, and wait for it, Los Angeles.
I wonder why.
Why would the UP be offering a rail service out of Houston back to the West Coast? And it's because there's no labour agreement and there's probably better rates. So again, continuation of the coastal shift in import volumes, a lot of concentration around Texas and Houston. If the rail's in there offering short line services and long haul services, you want to bet there's more volume in that market. So if you're selling capacity or working for shippers, there's a definite shift that seems to be sustaining itself to the Gulf Coast in terms of intermodal and truckload freight. Import volumes will probably continue to increase there. So that's in the Journal of Commerce, Kenny Lund, who's the EVP at Allen Lund Company, they were at our symposium last week in Carmel, made the comment, and also in Journal of Commerce, that they're seeing a lot more volume of produce come across from Mexico and much less coming out of California. Now, his comment was really interesting. He said, we normally used to see more volume come out of California than the rest of the US in terms of produce. The California number is a little bit difficult to get a handle on because they report the citrus volumes quarterly. So in between quarters, it's hard to get a read on exactly where they are. But what he did say is volumes are coming across in higher volumes across the southern border. I looked at some numbers this morning. Mexico through Texas, so Mexico imports through McAllen and Laredo are double what they were a year ago, double the volume of truckloads. it looks like California volumes are about at least a third lower, maybe half lower than this time last year. So we're seeing a lot more volume come across the southern border, which is interesting from a rate perspective because those rates are moving up. The really interesting data point, and this one's got me confused, volumes are down, there's no question in California, but rates are going up. Like, I'm not talking about rates going up significantly out of Salinas and Fresno for loads of produce. So you would say, well, okay, so if volume's down, why are rates going up? One hypothesis is that that's because we've lost capacity. We're still losing capacity out of the market. And remember, produce is fairly specialized. You've got to have fairly new equipment. I suspect that there's been an exodus of capacity in the refrigerated market also, and it's left, the higher end produce carriers to haul a lower amount of volume. I suspect that's why rates are going up out of the West Coast. So again, there's some mixed signals. Volume's down, but there's still not too late to see produce season provide the lift in spot rates that we would normally see through July 4. But here we are at Memorial Day, and volumes are kind of flat. Like we're not, we're still seeing spot market volumes around 2019 levels. The chart, you want to throw that chart up, Ryan? We could throw that chart up around capacity. I went back and pulled some numbers out because remember on the show a couple of weeks ago, the Cap City chart, we are this is the long-term chart. Remember, this is interstate carriers, and the black line is the net change each month. Why this is an important chart, everybody listening, during the pandemic, 83% of the new entrants that joined the industry came to DAT's spot market load board, 83%. So this is important because we added we only lost about 3,000 carriers in the month of June 2019. That's that drop there. And then from May 2020, just after the pandemic started, in that first year, we added about 50,000. But by the time we got to October of last year, we'd added 124,000 net new carriers. Since October, we've only lost 15,000 carriers. And so we're still seeing capacity leave the industry. Why these numbers are important, 15,000 is a very small number in the broad scheme of things. If I quickly do the math, divide 450,000, that represents about 3% of the total industry, total truckload carriers for hire. But it's a small number in the big scheme of things, 15,000 since last October. But if most of those are in the spot market, it makes a huge difference to the capacity levels in the spot market. And that's what moves the rates, is the capacity changes in the spot market. That's where most of the carriers are that are leaving the industry. And we're still losing capacity. So at some point, this starts to head back up towards the zeroed line and starts to turn positive. But the net of it is we're still losing capacity in the spot market. And I suspect that's what's happening in some of the produce markets, is we're seeing some of that spot market capacity see its way into the rates, because a lot of produce moves on the spot market compared to dry van. It's a lot of multi-farm pickups. It's a lot of time-sensitive freight, a lot of live load, live unload. It's a fairly specialised niche, and a lot of spot market carriers work in that area. So that's where we sit on the capacity front. Ryan, just throw up the chart showing where we are on sort of dry van compared to 16 and 19. We showed this, I think, maybe a couple of weeks ago, but the brown line, I think it's brown, is 2016. 2019, these were the last two freight recessions I could pull data from. You can see where we are with dry van. Rates have gone up following sort of that seasonal pattern leading up to Memorial Day. And in dry van, they've held their own there. They're kind of sitting there ex-fuel at about $1.70 per mile, but about 5 cents a mile higher than where they were at their peak, about 5 cents a mile higher than 2019. And the next one in reefer, though, presents a different picture. Rates went up in that surge around road check week, but they've come right back down. They're bobbing around under $2 a mile now. They were about $2 a mile at their best in 2019, which of course was a bad year for carriers. So not so good in the reefer front. My fear is that we see a fairly mediocre produce season, and we don't see any lift at all here. And So that's where we sit. We talked about Memorial Day being a pivotal point in time, and that's pretty much how it's turning out. But rates are clearly bouncing along the bottom. There's a headline today in the article quoting one of us saying they're sort of dredging along the bottom. That's what it feels like. And just to reiterate, this market, there is no, Jeff said this a couple of weeks ago, there is no catalyst on the demand front that's going to change the amount of volume for things we haul. It'll be determined by how much capacity moves out of the industry and how quickly it moves out. That's going to be the determining factor. That's why that first chart's an important one when we talk about the amount of carriers leaving the industry. We're still seeing capacity leave the industry, but not at a very fast rate. Question from the audience.
Yeah, what do we got?
What's the translation from that dog barking? What did that mean?
Bring all the produce to me. I'll help with all those watermelons.
Yeah. I need a treat. I need some greenies.
The big thing that sticks out to me on that last graph, Dean, is that, we had the pandemic and you saw all the carriers that entered the industry at that time. And prior to that, you saw it was bouncing around the neutral zone, little up with one little dip. But now, since the pandemic is over, it seems that we're riding under, the line with a lot more exiting. It just depends on how long they're going to exit for, and if they're going to be the adverse from prior to the pandemic, and if we're going to see that long term. I'm really curious about that right now.
Well, if you think about, we've only lost 12% of the carriers that joined since the pandemic, right? So there's a lot of carriers hanging in there. And that's why when I do my viability analysis and I look at where we were compared to 2019, we're better off than 2019 margins, but not by much. And this is what we said last week. While ever diesel keeps dropping, carriers can hang in longer.
Right.
If rates bottom out. So this is, when you think, this is a really challenging time to make any sort of prediction, because it just doesn't appear to be a catalyst that's going to change things dramatically unless diesel prices skyrocketed and there's some massive geopolitical risk. There's just nothing on the horizon that says this won't be a slow runoff in capacity.
Yep.
Just, and a very slow, mediocre year for demand until at least we get to fall, when we expect volumes to increase.
But still, Jason Miller said it 2 weeks ago. He doesn't see a boom in any one specific area that's going to indicate that things are going to rise. Yeah. And we still see it today. And the articles that I've read over the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure that you've read some, there's a lot of gloom and doom out there, that they think that this is going to remain through the peak season. We're not going to see any huge adjustments like we normally do around peak season, and that it's going to go into the first quarter of 2024 into May as a forecast, and that is scary.
Well, it follows. It's not just produce and imports. It's like the Baker Hughes rig count last week fell by 44 units in May. That's the biggest drop in 3 years. Higher gas prices. Are meaning that energy companies are curtailing the investment in new production plants. New drilling rigs for gas means less drill pipe and casing and other things for flatbeds to haul in Texas. So they've been rising for quite a while. Even though West Texas Intermediate's trading around $70 per barrel, that's still a good number in terms of investing. I think they've got to have more than $40 a barrel to make it viable to drill. But when you see the volume of drilling rigs that the Baker Hughes company report, they've been reporting it for 44 years. Sorry, since 1944. It's a really reliable indicator of demand for flatbeds in Texas. So when you see that starting to tail off, Texas has been pretty strong for flatbed carriers. Again, just another data point that says demand for flatbed carriers, sort of that industrial economy component of freight, will be flat this year. The deliberate play on words. We covered last week, single family homes are down, commercial construction's up, the net's probably fairly flat demand there. So across all three equipment types, there's lots of mixed signals, but nothing that's sort of telling us that all of the market is increasing. That certainty we had around seasonality is not there, because as I said on our show yesterday, there's just no momentum in the market. Like, it's sort of 1 week at a time. There's no momentum. You can say, oh yeah, things are building and we're off to the races and we'll see pretty strong demand for produce. In produce season, you could normally bank on produce volumes increasing right through to July 4. We covered last week, restaurant weddings are down.
Yeah.
The restaurant performance index is kind of mediocre to down. Who knows? I saw some spending numbers yesterday showing that we're still spending a lot of money. We're clearly spending it on things that trucks don't haul necessarily, a lot more on services. So again, hard to say where this market's going to end, but it certainly looks like a fairly mediocre. My boss Ken Adamo said it, I think, best 3 weeks ago. We're 13 months into a 17 to 20 month freight cycle, and it looks like being fairly tepid market performance for the next 4 or 5 months. So I think that's what summer's going to look like, more of a continuation of the same.
So
I
Dean,
hope the gas don't skyrocket like they usually do in summertime, because they know that everybody's hitting the road to go to the beaches and travel and all of this. Haven't seen it yet.
I think gasoline will typically go up, but diesel prices are coming down, and EIA's got them down at $3.50 a gallon. So there's another. So if diesel keeps dropping like that, that gives carriers more runway to hang in there. Sorry, Dan, I think we cut you off there.
No. It's okay. I see a couple of things, and I love all your thoughts on it. So, one, I think the produce market, especially on the West Coast, because of its volatility over the last couple of years, I think it's kind of like the hazmat market. Certain carriers have just said, you know what, I'm going to retool and do something else,
right.
From a capacity issue, because we've seen. So, for example, hazmat, there's only a few carriers left that will take any kind of hazmat. And that market is booming. I'm moving hazmat every week. And when we find somebody, it's like we will pay whatever we have to get it moved.
Exactly.
Because you will hardly find, especially LTL has. Oh, my God, like crazy. But also, I think instead of seasonality, I think the market itself, North America, is shifting more to geographicality. And I know I made that word up, but what I'm saying is,
I like it.
I've got a geographicality, right?
I want to put that on a T-shirt. That's a good one.
That's it.
And the reason I say that is because the different parts of North America that you work within, some are booming. Like I've got a customer, he's got to make over 6 million bricks a day just to keep up with demand. And he said, Dan, we were supposed to be dead. He goes, we are so busy right now. It's incredible. And so all of a sudden I've got a flurry of business that wasn't there 2 weeks ago that started. I look at the home building up near me, and my wife and I went up to Collingwood on the weekend, and the amount of construction going up towards Blue Mountain and the amount of construction from there going downtown is like I've never seen anything like it in Ontario.
Right.
And I think if you're running specific markets, you're going to be busier as opposed to we would look at it as more of a seasonality. And coming into Christmas, I think depending on what market you're in, you might see an increase and a spike in business.
Right.
And you might not, and the perfect example of that was when I used to do wrapping paper. No matter what was happening, there's a shitload of wrapping paper being sold by Christmas, right? Like those types of things. We're supposed to have a bad winter this year. We're supposed to have an extra dry summer. So things like grass seed that doesn't need water is going to be spiking in stores. I've noticed. I've been to Canadian Tire 6 times now. Every time I go in, the spray grass, where it's like hydro seeding, the hydro seeding, gone in every store, the hydro seeding kits. So I'm like, okay, so people are obviously saying, because hydro seeding, you don't really need water. You just put the hydro seed down and it actually grows without water, and it can grow on brick and everything. And so we're experiencing such heat. Like I don't think we've had rain and don't get me wrong, we had rain for like 3 weeks straight, but we haven't had rain in so long. My grass is already brown out front. It looks like a cow town with tumbleweeds going down, right? So it's like the different markets, and for all you salespeople out there, the different markets you're in is pretty much going to determine if you have a business or not in the next coming months. That's the way I see it. I'd love your guys' thoughts on it.
I like that.
Yes.
You're exactly right.
Yep.
I think it's a very, very astute analysis, because we're seeing a lot more value for carriers when I look at rates regionally.
Mhm.
You know, I was looking at some of the rates yesterday in the southeast. You know, rates are particularly good in certain regions for carriers.
Yep.
You know, as we always say here on the show, there's no one home at the average, because the real opportunities and margins are in the outliers, and that's where some of the value is for carriers. You can range from, you know, if you said the average is $2 a mile for dry vans, well, it's 78 cents a mile from Seattle to Los Angeles, but, you know, it's $3.80 a mile from Montgomery to Orlando. So it really depends on, you know, where you're running and, you know, what sort of specialty you got. I'd never thought about LTL hazmat. I mean, that's clearly a fairly specialized niche, Dan.
Yeah, that's a niche.
Yeah.
But there used to be tons of carriers in that Jersey, PA area that did LTL hazmat to Canada.
Right.
Now, like, so not last week, the week before, we missed Tuesday for pickup. They didn't pick up till Friday afternoon. Like the half of Tuesday, Wednesday, all of Thursday, and half of Friday, we could not find anyone to pick up. Friday afternoon, somebody picked up. Now, it was a holiday here on Monday. So even the Tuesday, they said, wouldn't have left until Thursday. And typically, it's next day delivery. Most LTL, because we had like 12 skids, so it's half a truck, right? So that would have typically been next day delivery. It sat on the dock until Friday. Like, we literally missed 4 days that normally 6 months ago we could have just, or no, probably not, probably a year ago, we could have just picked up like that and gone. So, you know, if you're in that market and you have those relationships, there's a lot of money to be made.
That's gold.
There's a lot of assistance to be given.
I agree.
Yeah. I was just trying to pull some rates up here. I mean, one of the things. Sorry, Dan. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, you know what? I'm wondering, because of, you know, all the disruptions and everything that we're seeing, and to Dan's point of view, I wonder if companies are going to take a look at their network and do a network redesign to get closer to their customer base, because of that simple thing of the average length of haul compared to super regional to regional deliveries. And that dollar value, like you said, Dean, 78 cents, you know, compared to $3.80. Of course, on the short haul, you're going to have the rate per mile is going to be much higher than on the long haul.
Yep.
So, I mean, I wonder if they're going to do that just to make sure that they have the capacity and that it's steady.
Well, that's why I mentioned the BNSF and UP announcement today and yesterday of putting more rail services out of Houston, because that's going to change how networks are balanced or structured. Remember, I think we covered it, I'm not sure when we talked about it, maybe last week, but we've seen a 50% increase in inbound, outbound volume out of Fort Worth in truckload volume. So, and lower volume on the West Coast. So that's going to change that paradigm, you know, that we've had forever, which is that there's so much volume coming out of the West Coast. It was always easier to run there and come back out of there. We're having lots of debate in the comments about how to pronounce Dan's word.
Geographicality.
Geographicality.
That's it.
That's it.
Geographicality. Yeah, that's it. I think the N needs to be in there. So I think the Falco's got it.
You think so?
My man, Sam.
Yeah, I think Sam's got it.
Sam's got
So
it.
to that point, like if you look at, and I pulled some rates up this morning in RateView. If you look at, you know, rates out of, say, Salinas, I quickly pull this up now. Salinas to, let me go to New York. And this will give you a good idea of the difference in rates. Salinas to New York is 3,000 miles. The 7-day average is up to $2.20. That's up 50 cents a mile in the last week on that one lane. That's a pretty busy lane for iceberg lettuce in particular into Hunts Point. So capacity, even though volumes are kind of mediocre, capacity is tightening regionally, like in that very tight region. The average, the USDA is reporting reefer rates nationally at about $3.80 a mile, just for specialized refrigerated haulers. And of course, if you're a specialized refrigerated hauler, you've got to have pretty good gear. You've got to have a less than 3-year-old refrigerated motor. You've got to be able to make a mile. So the outbound rate nationally was for refrigerated carriers last week 205. So you think about frozen produce, ice cream, the whole mix is averaging at 205. But if you're a regional carrier specializing in produce, the rates are much higher.
Yeah.
And I think that's an LTL hazmat example, Dan, where if you're running high value cargo out of a particular market, only the best equipment's probably going to be in the mix for those runs, those long haul lanes.
Or somebody has, and the reason I say this, because I know a friend of mine who has a trucking company. He would spend millions on new reefers.
Right.
And he said, Dan, when it comes down to it, in the end, and what he would do is he would chase that produce market for the produce season, get paid 10, 15 grand US a load, come back to Canada. It just hasn't been there. And he's like, and if you have these trailers that cost 3 times as much as a normal trailer, and you're not making that 9, 10, 12 weeks of 10, 15, 20 grand every 2 days or every 4 days, he goes, it's not worth it. It's not. He goes, because like one claim wipes out your entire year's profit. And he says, so like we as literally the Marines in the ditches, the ones that are digging, like not us brokers, these hands like barely get dirty, and everybody will tell you that. We're here for a service, and we provide a service, and we help clients with everything else. But if it wasn't for our partners, we wouldn't have a job. We're not the ones that are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain and buy new equipment, millions of dollars to maintain and buy new equipment, because like you said, every 3 years. I think more are going to retool as this continues. This year continues, because during COVID, you could literally not make a sales call and still make a lot of money. Yep. Like it was crazy how much freight, and Ryan will vouch for this, new people coming into the industry, they're making mint right away. And now it's starting to tighten, right? And I know salespeople who had customers, or the customers are like, yeah, there's just, sorry, man, we're going with our core people. You were kind of second to last in, even though you've been in for 3 years, and you're first out. And I just think in the end, it's going to be a retooling. How companies had to retool during COVID, and everybody had to look at their supply chain and really get aggressive on what they were doing. I think it's the carrier side now, the broker side now, to say, what, do I want 25 customers? Do I want 10 really good customers?
That's it.
And as a carrier, do I want to deal with brokers, or do I want to deal with 4PLs? Or do I want to deal with just house accounts, like just actual shippers myself? And that has to be a retooling. And I think that retooling is really what's going to stabilize our market. Because I personally, and again, I'm just my thoughts, and I could be totally wrong, but I think when they see retooling, you're going to have a lot of carriers that are like, you know what, I make more money on the broker side, I'm just going to sell all my equipment. And then there's going to be less equipment in the field. And it's this like roller coaster that we're at the bottom of the dip now, coming out of it. And it's like anything, how do you make decisions in a valley? Because they always say don't make decisions in a valley.
Right.
But in order to get out of the valley, you sometimes have to make really harsh decisions in order to make it out. Right. And it's going to be a slippery slope. I really believe that. But I also believe,
another thing too that we didn't even talk about. How about temp controlled hazmat? Talk about an edge.
It's pharmaceuticals. Constantly.
Hazmat moves alone is tough, like you said, Dan, out of New Jersey, New York, PA area. But when you get into temp controlled hazmat, you're talking about a whole different animal. Because now you can't use that reefer for produce because you moved hazmat in it. There's so many different things which causes a little bit of disruptions, capacity issues on that side. So, don't forget about that as well, because there's a lot.
Well, I think we all, through our careers, there's things that we used to move. Like I used to move LTL ice cream as LTL. Frozen, like to find something to mix with that was almost impossible out of Texas. Now it's probably possible, maybe it's even worse. But then you look at, you go, I had a student of mine call me last week and say, I got an opportunity I want to talk to you about it. I said, sure. He goes, I got a customer that has one skid of live oysters that has to be at, it was some weird temperature where they can't freeze, but they got to be really cold. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not fresh. I go, one skid? He said, yeah. I said, are they willing to move it exclusive? He says, no. And they're price conscious about it. I'm like,
Good luck.
yeah. I said, you know what? Honestly, I'd walk away.
Oh yeah.
I said, I'd walk away. I said, I wouldn't care where it was going to or from. I'd walk away because I said, if one, they're coming at you and saying we're price conscious, I said, where does that price, what do they mean by that? And he says, I don't know. I said, okay, so you could be talking, they want to pay $250 to move a skid that's going to cost you $7. I go, but you spend all this time, and Ryan, I know you do seafood in that manner. You were doing it overseas, I think, but you were trucking it and then putting it on a plane and going overseas. I said, like, to me, I just don't see a carrier saying, I'm going to put up a block in my trailer. Like, I'm going to put up a division in my trailer and keep this almost frozen while I have everything else for one skid, unless they're going to charge you for it. Like, there has to be a profitability for this. And I'll have to ask him. I'll ask him for next week what actually happened. But I told him to walk away. I said, I don't personally say, oh, but the business can grow. I said, okay, but is it going to grow, or did the guy just tell you that so you would work harder on it? You know what I mean? Like, and I didn't mean to be an ass about it. I was being realistic. Like, when is it growing? Well, he doesn't know. These are samples. I'm like, okay, well, now you're counting on the samples being good and the person having samples from 5 other people, then him choosing this. I go, like, what is the percentage of this growing? So what, ask the company, what was the percentage of the other customers that you had? Because what you're asking me for is very difficult. I can probably make it happen, but I have to justify the ROI to my supplier. And I don't think that's an unfair conversation to have right now with your customers.
I think
justifying the ROI.
Yeah, I think the next question I would ask would be, hey, Mr. Shipper, do you have a benchmark in mind, just to see what he's going to say? Because he may just be throwing an arbitrary number out there, because obviously this isn't the first time that he's done it. So I would think that there is benchmarks there. And how difficult, those questions, have you had a problem moving this? Why are you reaching out to me? Obviously you've moved this before. Do you have a benchmark on this, sir? I'd love to take a look at it a little bit deeper and talk to you about it. Boom.
Like, Ryan, how's your seafood? Is it still easy to book? Is it getting more difficult, or costs rising? What's happening there?
No, it's really sad if everybody kind of knows what's going on in Nova Scotia with all the fires and stuff like that, right? So it's slowed down with there. And there's a point in time where, like, you're not allowed to, like, really, like, legally fish, just so we can kind of, like, save. I think there's some laws out there, but no, it's been the same. It's been exactly the same that we've been doing it since 2000. And it's really important, like, as you're talking about, like, that one skid, and the one thing that you said was about, find 10 quality customers, and there's customers who are seasonal. Like, there's another customer of mine who does outdoor furniture. So literally they only work from April to, I want to say, maybe September. But I'm their guy. They're not fishing for other rates or things like that. So when you kind of really become a resource, and you just to add to that oyster thing too, it's just, if you're able to figure that out, then that's a customer that no one's going to switch from. So we look at it from the opposite side of, like, hey, as a new rep, as you're kind of talking about, maybe it's hard for you to do, but Matt Dahl talks about this all the time, that he'll take the complicated 10 drop seafood because he does seafood as well, but he knows that his customer probably on a Rolodex of 1 or 2 or 5, right? As opposed to hundreds of, hey, I got some plastic in a pallet. Let's shoot this out to 300 brokers and see what they do. So we always talk about niches and stuff like that, but that's a learning experience, right? And when you kind of start looking at it from both sides, and you can kind of grow with both. So coming back to answering your question, no, it's literally been the same. So, when you kind of operate in your season, then this can really be your life. Right. So I'm a big fan of executing in your season, and things don't change that much. And if I was handling that oyster customer, I'd try to figure out a way, how can I get a case delivered to my house? But well, that's probably another conversation there.
It is, and I love that you brought that up, and kind of glass half full with that opportunity, because you're right. If you figure it out, like, you're in now. And as long as you do your work, you're probably not going to have very much competition in those very difficult moves.
Well, I want
I
to add
remember that a
something to
lot with
that
my
too.
pharmaceutical customers.
You got it. You really have to because when I worked at my previous place, there was another person who was hired with me as a sales rep, and he reached out to this company, and they were doing logistics for like shows, like trade shows and stuff like that. And then unfortunately, he got fired, so obviously the accounts came to me, and I had to learn how to do show freight on the fly. Like, hey, we've got like this 40 truck project coming up for Cirque du Soleil. What am I going to do? Say no? We looked at it, we did the proposals, we did everything. So when it's really important to understand that if you really put in the time and the work, you can make anything happen, and look at the market. Because last week I was having the shittiest Wednesday of my life because we took over some new lanes for existing customer, and we were killing it, but those guys were complaining about that we took away their lanes from them, right? So there's that balance too, as you're talking, Jeff, with about looking at your carrier base and understanding, hey, maybe I want to go lean. There's a lot of carriers a lot of carriers and freight brokers are going lean too. A lot of asset guys I talked to, I was telling you guys off air that I met with one yesterday, and they're going pretty lean as well because it just makes sense. Every dollar counts. So we have to look at that from that standpoint.
When you say lean, you mean lean as in what's sort of the
well, in terms of like
carrier base.
Yeah, carrier base and like even like the company, right? So if it's like a 15-man operation, you kind of try to figure out, hey, is it possible that we can get to 13? Can we get to 12 and that's where we kind of think of from the bigger picture. You're like, no, like what's that 60 grand or 50 grand or 40 grand to you? You got that extra body, but then it's just like you got to look at their profits and losses. And those are the conversations I have with my customers, because when you guys were talking about as well, what I'm seeing, Dean, is a lot of these customers, a lot of new people, new faces are showing up. So they worked at a different place and they're coming there and implementing. Jeff, you can attest to this because you were a logistics manager when you went to a different place and you talked about like implementing some of the stuff that you did, whether it be a Jaguar or whether it be Snyder and stuff like that. What was that kind of process like for you?
Well, it's the trickle down effect, right? I mean, it's that when you take a new person's position, you have to sit down your team and talk about your processes and the way that you want to attack it. You have to share that information, and that's the biggest problem when traffic managers, logistics managers leave their position. They don't tell the service provider who's coming in to replace them. And they surely don't do hey, here's the introduction. I want you guys to meet before I depart. That's the biggest problem and hump that a lot of service providers have to get over because that transition's not there.
Well, Jeff, want to add to that. I'm smiling through that because it's so true. I'm literally going to an RFP right now. We're in the second round of a 3-round RFP, and we literally just got an email that this person left. Here's a new contact. No introduction, and I've never talked to this person in my life. And there was one big company, a 4PL, that we were doing an RFP as well for another customer of theirs, and they hit us up on maybe the second or last day saying we literally lost the account to another company. There's no. I understand from that understanding, like if you lose from 4PL to another 4PL, but where it's like somebody's coming in, so you look at it, someone's leaving to go to another role. Where is that? What do you call it? That handing over of the file, right? Where is that? There's no transition at all. So I think that's really important that, you have those conversations with your customers, because we always glance, and Dan, you could attest to this. We always glance about, you build a great customer relationship. They're going to take you wherever they go, but we never glance on the fact of that current company. Because at the end of the day, you are providing amazing goals for that current company. Who knows if you'll do it for your buddy who's moved to somewhere else? But that transition that conversation doesn't come up a lot. And I think us as sales professionals, we need to be ahead of the curve. And don't be afraid to ask that question. Like, hey, if it's something that you decide to like leave in the future, what is kind of like the succession plan?
And you know what? You got to talk less and listen more. Sometimes there's a lot of hints in what's being said to you when you have those discussions. Well, I'm leaving, I'm going, or something, and you just let it go right over your head, and you don't even, pry into that. Those are the conversations. It's like, hey, what are you doing over the next couple months or whatever? And listen to hesitation. You listen to little bits and pieces that like, hey, this guy's not going to be here anymore. Oh, who's taking your position? Those are the critical conversations you got to have, especially for sustainability. If you were with that company as a service provider for 2 or 3 years, and that guy takes an exit stage left, you better be asking those questions.
Same thing for carriers too. Carriers they move like as us as logistic people move from assets, move for opportunities. Like understand that if you're dealing with somebody, just have those conversations, and I feel like they're just gonna respect you more. Like that's how you protect your customers. Yeah, at the end of the day, like you represent whatever flag you represent, but you're there to protect their company. You're not there just to book freight, and you look at those add-on services that you do. Just be more than a broker, because like at the beginning, both Dean and Jeff, you guys mentioned some doom and gloom for the next couple months, but I had a conversation with a sales rep and we're talking. I was like, you know what? This is the time, as we're going into June 1st tomorrow. This is the time for me personally to envision what my family's going to open on Christmas Day. And I know that's weird to kind of say, and I don't want to be materialistic, but for me to design what I want my family to open up, whether it be whatever they kind of their prized possessions, and having that smile what they open. But this is the time to put in that work. June, July, August, September, October, November. Think of Christmas Day, and I think that gives that mindset, because people are talking about, oh, produce is down or produce is up or whatever. So they're thinking short term. But when you think long term, those short term wins will come with it. And just to add with Dan, what you're saying about produce, Dean, we're seeing produce. I like my indicator is looking at grocery flyers. So when I see watermelons are being really cheap, so last week is like $7, $8.99, $9.99, $9.99 for a thing. A local grocery here, that's a pretty big chain here, they're going watermelons this week for $3.50. So that means that there is a big influx of watermelons coming in. So that's a good opportunity to have a conversation.
Yeah. Good point. Very good.
My trigger used to be when I was at my asset carriers. We used to do watermelons, and then all of a sudden we'd have like 4 gaylords of watermelons on our dock, and we'd get an email from our operations manager saying watermelons are on the warehouse. Go and grab them. And I used to like stack my trunk with watermelons and bring them.
Why is it never like Apple iPhones, eh? Like why is it never like a MacBook? Like a couple pallets of like our favorite beer.
We had like 10, 15 truckloads of those in the yard, and they never gave them away ever. I don't know what it was. Bastards.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's like when you get the email saying, "Oh, we got skids of this on the dock." It's like, "Oh, all right, I guess the season's in." But you're right, Ryan. The flyers are a really good indicator of when things are hitting hard.
But so Ryan, you mentioned about Christmas, right? This is something that I think we glossed over maybe a couple of weeks ago. But the reason we talk about demand and produce season and carriers leaving the industry is that I think shippers are acutely aware that when this market turns, there's going to be a lot less carriers in the market. So like now's the time to be talking about capacity, because even if there is an excess of capacity now, that's not permanent. And that's why we talk about, fuel prices and rates, because we know that spot rates lead contract by 4 to 6 months. It's not hard to envisage, this market repeating the same cycle we've seen over multiple years, that by the time we get to fall, shippers are going to be struggling to find trucks to move this, what could be, hopefully, a peak season in freight in the fall. So now's the time to be talking about relationships and capacity and locking in those carriers, because heck, I don't know how you'd go into the fall shipping season without capacity locked in now.
Yeah, you're relying on the spot market, and you're relying on fluctuations like this. And when every time I was locking in capacity, I would start with, how do you get to where you need to be for us to create this lock-in?
Right.
And that was always my biggest question, because a lot of carriers now don't look towards fall. Like they got a new customer now sending them to Nashville, Tennessee, for example.
Right.
They might not even know that stuff stops in September and your stuff starts mid-September.
Great point.
Right. So it's like wherever you're picking up, and partners, true partners, I believe, will have the conversations with you. Like, listen, I need to understand, what is the shipping seasonality of this? Like I know for a fact, my guy that does all the bricks, I'm not looking for a ton of shipping out of him December, January, February, March, because very few construction projects that include brick are done at that time. They schedule them accordingly. But the next couple of months, he's going to be out of his mind. But that's not something that I look and say, okay, that's going to give me a Christmas bonus. For other words, like I would look at my wrapping paper accounts as the Christmas bonus. So no matter what my business, if it does this, the wrapping paper is going to make it do this. Like Ryan said, seasonality, right? And maybe that's going back to geographicality, about like different geographical areas. No, that was an easy transition. Geographicality. Yeah. Even
I can't even say it.
It's a word now. It's a word now.
Geographicality.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
All right, that's all I got to say for today, boys.
All right.
No, but I love those points that you make too, right? It's coming back to it because this is a show for everybody, right? And I think everybody, we see the comments, and my last point is like you see the trolls everywhere and things like that, and those are when we're locking in capacity. We had that capacity chart up. Be smart about it. Like, don't go after maybe somebody who might not be in business. You'll know. Like yes, we want to help like the owner operators and things like that, but realistically, if everything kind of diesel keeps dropping, but like the demand isn't there, like for me, I got a requirement, just like I got a requirement with customers. I got a requirement with carriers that they have a certain amount of years in business, a certain amount of power units that they can dedicate, and they've got some business, because like Jeff kind of says, if that business is lost to them, then what's the point of them doing my freight? They have to have their backhaul or their reload. So I think when we're looking at something like this and where the market is at, what everybody's kind of reflecting as we're end of half year, sorry. Look at your last 6 months. Look at those relationships, because these were the tough times. So you got to feed them. You really got to look at that and reevaluate not just your carrier, your customer relationships. As Dan kind of says, I've spoken to people who have like 75 customers. I'm like, God bless, man. I maybe got max 10, and I'm happy. I'm not taking market share from anybody, and just let it rip and be happy with what you have.
Remember,
I think you're a happier life if you have 10 over 75. Personally, much happier life.
Remember, it's a two-way street, though. It's the best kind of conversation is to have with each other is, hey, where do you need to be? Hey, where do you need to be? Find that fine line where it works on both sides, where you can continue the relationship and cover their freight annually, not just on the peaks and the valleys and racing off to the best rates and all of that. You're trying to build relationships, and those are the critical questions that you have to ask.
Well, if you're so good, like, for me, if you truly believe in relationships, both sides, why wouldn't you go cost plus? Why wouldn't you, 100% just go cost plus with your carriers? Let your carrier be like, authorize them to speak on notes. The best conversations I have is when my carrier, my customer, and me and my ops team, they're all involved together. There's no blind shipments or like where we're just everybody knows what they need to do, and everybody knows what they're making, right? So if a carrier comes back to me and says, you know what, we underquoted this or something like that, then it's like, well, I gave you the opportunity. I didn't say, hey, here's my rate, can you match it? Those are the conversations that I think suck. Hey, can you beat it by $50 or do this? I was like, no, I'm not trying to do it. If you know your operating costs, like Dean always says, know your operating costs. That's the point of this show. This is the point of DAT IQ Live. Understand that, and then sell yourself, and then win with service. It's not that hard.
Yep. Nope. Well, it's not, but you know what? It's work.
Everything is work.
Right? And
nothing's for free.
Well, if it was easy, everybody would do it. But it's work, right? It's thinking outside the box, like we try and give you on these days. It's understanding this data versus this time of year versus this time of year versus this. And when you put it all together, it's a very simple formula. It really is. It's just having those conversations. Like we're going to talk very soon about how do you ask for more money in a market where everybody's trying to pay you less, right? Sometimes we got to have the tough conversations.
Oh yeah.
And that's on customer and carrier.
Yeah.
But the habit humans in general mostly have is, oh, you can do it? Okay, cool. And then they lock them in. Instead of having the in-depth conversation, thinking, how do you plan to deploy your resources in 6 weeks? How long have you had the customer? What is their typical busy season versus slow season? And they're not even asking you about your customer. You're asking them about theirs. That in turn, you're using their customer to service your customer.
Right.
And if their customer has a blip, something goes wrong, they lose an account, and that's why I've always said, make friends with the salespeople. Because even if the traffic manager leaves, you still got it into the company. And the salespeople in the end usually have more power than the traffic manager.
Yeah, yeah, always.
It's what I've found throughout my entire business. Your buddies with the salespeople, you screw up, they say, I don't want this carrier involved anymore. Traffic manager's hands are completely tied because what are you doing? Yep. When you mess up, you're screwing with the salesperson's paycheck. And that's the big directly, right? Like if you screw up, you might be screwing with the company profitability, but that's over a longer period of time.
Mhm.
If the company loses a customer, if there's an issue immediately with a customer, the salesperson is going to be one of the first people to hear about it. And what are they thinking? My Christmas bonus is in jeopardy because you're screwing up. So
Right.
fix. And that salespeople are some of the greatest place to start as well when you're selling.
Even at
they'll
the
talk.
top level, at Mahogany Road, talk to the C-level people. They would be more than happy to listen to you. They're the ones that are signing off on everything. They're in control of everything. And a lot of times they're not really aware of all the operational things that are going on. They just see a number, and as long as that number is the same and there's no real, loss or gain, okay, I'll sign on that. Yeah, things are going well, until you put something out and you let them know where they can find extra dollars to put to their bottom line. Then they're all ears. So
yeah. And especially after COVID, CEOs are paying way more attention to logistics than they ever have before.
They have to. The articles are there. And, just the last point before we close off here, like as Jeff is kind of saying, as Dan is kind of making, Dean was in Fresno last week. He was speaking with the farmers, he's speaking with the produce, and those are the best place. Start at the grassroots, understand the true operations, right? Because everyone's always going to inflate whatever their conversations are, right? So it's really important to kind of see that. So, gents, it's amazing data day. It's really good to have the full team back and always kind of giving that knowledge. Dean, I know you're not traveling because you're off for traveling until there, but can you tell everybody in the audience about what's going on next week with Data IQ Live?
Yeah, we've got Saritha Williamson. Is it Williams? Willingham. Gosh, I got that wrong. She's on our show next week. Big fan of hers. I had a brief interview with her after you recommended. So she's on next week, which is going to be an exciting show. Couple of data points this week. I've got a blog post out about the festival season. So it's in my refrigerated update. It's all the festivals across the country. If you're wondering about where produce season is peaking between now and October, follow the festivals. Next week's blog post is about the 100 deadly days of summer, which is the 100 days between Memorial Day and Labor Day. It's an incredibly risky time for teenagers in particular. But the reason is not what you think. So I've delved into some of the NHTSA data and the federal highway data to sort of explore what's behind that, because it affects all of us, not just truckers and teenagers, but it affects all of us. So we can talk about that next week on next week's show, the 100 deadly days of summer.
100 deadly days of summer.
I like that. That's gonna be a good conversation. I think that's gonna be awesome that you're talking about it. And festivals, anybody in Canada and Ontario specifically, Rib Fest is every weekend, so you're kind of seeing everything that's kind of going on, especially with food, the amount of blooming onions and the amount of ribs that get made. We went to the one on the weekend, so it's pretty awesome. Cowboy, you had an amazing episode of your show yesterday. What's going on in your life, my man?
Yeah, I got another amazing guest. Always wanted to talk to him. Dr. Jason Miller is going to be on the show on Monday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Storytelling Chronicles.
I thought you didn't reveal your peeps.
What's that?
I thought you didn't reveal your peeps.
You know what I thought about it? I was like, you know what? Yeah, I mean, because I got some good peeps that are coming on, and it's like they definitely need to be heard, and a lot of people, recognize them. I look up to them. They watch their content and all of that. So yeah, it's important for people to know who's on.
I like that a lot. Shout out to Madison. This message, Madison, shoot me a DM. I can help you with that. It's actually pretty fun. Fun industry to be on. So yeah, shoot me a message. I can definitely help you with that. Dan, top 3 takeaways from today with Data Day.
Oh gosh. Geographicality. You knew that one was first.
That you would end with it.
No. That's first. Geographicality, as opposed to seasonality. Maybe look at that in your network. Look at that with your customer base. Understand when your customers are going to be up or down. And now is the time to have the conversation with your carriers, if you're locking anything in, as to how they get where they're going to help you. Have the full length conversation. It'll be worth it in the end.
Awesome. So this is Sales Chatter. Tune in tomorrow where we get into Personal Development Day, which is an amazing day. But we have an amazing day on Friday. Friday is going to be, we're celebrating 400 followers on our LinkedIn page. So it's actually going to be giveaway day. So we're going to be making the event today and inviting everybody. And we had an amazing Stacy Gibson, the cowboy, will be joining us on Friday for funs and laughs. And I promise it's all going to be fun questions because it's giveaways. Nobody wants to answer deep stuff. So with that being said, this is Sales Chatter. Catch the replay again live at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And we'll see you guys tomorrow for Personal Development Day, again, as we kind of say. So, Dean, Jeff, thank you guys so much for spending your time with us and our amazing audience. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Take care, everybody.
Have a great day.
For you guys.